Hello, Mark and Penny. My name is Dr. Alex Stewart, and I am presenting to you a research report I've done on your property that you're selling, located at 71 Deer Ridge Drive. Now, I've been hired by your real estate agent, Diane Farmer, to put this together, and it is meant to be an independent review of the property. It has no bearing on whether you buy, sell, and do anything with this home, but it's primarily meant to give you an objective point of view on where this home is positioned within the market and what's going on in the local market. For a little bit of background on me, so you know who I am and why I'm doing this. I started my career as a financial analyst for Georgia Pacific and the Home Depot, and then began an 8-year stint as a mortgage banker here in Jacksonville, where I fell in love with researching the real estate market and helping my clients make data-driven decisions. A lot of clients had a lot of concerns, a lot of questions, a lot of experiences, and they would make decisions without really understanding what's going on in the market. And they would get frustrated because they weren't getting the results they wanted. And I was able to learn that I could provide a lot of analysis from my prior career as an analyst to the clients, and they would be able to make better decisions. So after getting my doctorate from the University of Florida, I started a company called the Market Distillery, and it's meant to be an independent research-based company. So I have no incentive for any transaction around who does what, but I'm here to provide independent objective analysis of the real estate market so that realtors and their clients can make informed data-driven decisions. Okay. So this is done with me pulling all the information on June 25th. So it is as fresh as it can be. However, depending on the time that you see this, just know the markets move, and so things could have changed. Okay. Now, there are multiple sections that we'll go through, but I want to start by walking you through the listing details, and this is just to confirm that I've got the right house and what I'm operating on for reference. So the subject property is located at 71 Deer Ridge Drive. This is within 20 mile at Nocatee in zip code 32081. You can see in the map here the neighboring zip code 32082. These are the two primary Ponte Vedra zip codes, which I think is really, really important, as you'll see in the analysis. And when I did this analysis, I included the major neighborhoods of the Outlook at 20 Mile, the Ranch at 20 Mile, and 20 Mile at Nocatee. And this gave us where we were looking for comparable properties. And also, when I analyzed the market, I analyzed it for the zip code of 32081. It's really important to note, too, that new construction plays a huge role in this zip code, which isn't the case necessarily with other zip codes around Jacksonville. So that is a dynamic that you have to deal with, a competitor in your market that other listings in other areas don't have to deal with. And we'll talk more about that. When we look at the history of this home, there are two instances that it has been listed in the MLS. Originally, it was listed and sold at $679,900. And that happened back in 2018. It started out on the market at $697,000 and ultimately closed 3% lower after 84 days on market. You bought this home privately for $1.4 million in September of 24 and have most recently listed it in May for $1.625. Currently, it sits at $1.575 million, which is 3% lower, and we're at about 30 days on market. Now, I want to bring this up. Diane provided me with a list of the changes and updates you've made to the home. And I think that this is a really, really important point to make. Now, as a mortgage banker, I worked with a ton of appraisers. And commonly, when we would get appraisal reports back and say the value didn't come back as expected, or there was questions that clients had about why the value was what it was, I learned a whole lot about how appraisers view properties, and I think that this can be relevant context for you because I know that you put a lot of money into the home since you purchased it. And now I looked at the pictures from when it was originally listed compared to what it is now, and here's where some of the challenges are. A lot of the changes made to this property would be considered stylistic, not material. And what I mean by that is when we take a tile floor that might be considered out of style or ugly, and we put a new tile floor that is more on trend or more modern, more current in style terms, unfortunately, an appraiser gives no value for that, because at the end of the day, it's still a tile floor. Now, if you took, say, a carpet floor, especially maybe an older carpet floor, and you upgraded that to tile or hardwoods, then sometimes you can get credit for that. But in general, those are stylistic changes. If we paint rooms different colors, that doesn't change anything. Adding accents doesn't necessarily change any of the value. Where you do get the value is the swimming pool and the summer kitchen. So those are material changes to the property that would add value. But any appraiser would tell you that it is very difficult to get dollar for dollar value. Meaning, if you spent $100,000 on the swimming pool, almost never will you see your property value go up by $100,000 equally, right? Typically, there is a discount because the cost to put in a new pool is more than the resale value of that pool. Similar to cars, right? New car costs more than a used car, even if there's not a lot of miles on it. Now, I have included down here in the notes how appraisers rate properties. They give it a condition rating and they give it a quality rating. Okay. Condition is sort of, again, are things worn out? Is the house beat up? How lived in is the house? Quality is really what you're probably going to be focused on the most. And this is going to be related to, again, how upgraded is the home? How custom is the home? Now, from all of my experience, your home, especially in Nocte, would very likely be rated what's called a Q3, right? Q1 is a totally custom, oceanfront, Ponte Vedra, $10 million house kind of a deal. Q2 is going to be, we tore down a house, we built a totally custom house, and it is done with incredibly high-end finishes, but maybe it's not, the creme de la creme. Q3 is where you fall, and here is the description down here. You can read this for yourself, but it is typically going to be a higher quality build, right, from an individual readily available designer plans, right? So I understand this was a model home from Dosty, which would make it a designer plan home. Above standard development, which I would say this probably is. And it includes significant exterior ornamentation, which would be all the landscaping that you have, and interiors that are well finished. Again, these are the light fixtures. You have updated those, but at the end of the day, they would just still be considered an upgraded light fixture, not something where you would get dollar for dollar value on that, right? The workmanship exceeds acceptable standards, right? This is above and beyond sort of typical builder grade things, and many material and furnishes have been upgraded from stock standards, right? I think this is exactly where your home fits, right? The hard part is when I look at the pictures from when it sold back in 2018, again, I don't know that the home changed to a totally different level. Obviously, you've put your own personal touches on it. Obviously, it is a beautiful home and it has an artistic flair to it. But that is largely going to be buyer preference. Some people may prefer the way it looked before. Some people may prefer the way you have it. I don't believe that it was necessarily taken into this completely custom realm, because at the end of the day, the square footage or the layout of the home is the same. And a lot of those things went from high-end A to high-end B, which is not a judgment on anything that you've done. It's how a independent appraiser would look at a home. That's the primary point I want to make there. And so that can be a challenge when you buy the house for 1.4 and you put money into the home. You typically expect to get a return. But in this case, I'm not sure that the market would view it that way per se, right? Now, if we go ahead and look at the market history, here is what's going on. And I want to bring this up first, because whenever you have $1 million plus home, the stock market can play a big impact in the buyer pool that would be out there. Now, we saw in the first quarter stocks fall significantly from February to April. Now, you listed the home towards the end of May, so the stock market had come back a decent amount. But I do think that this created a lot of hesitation and concern in that buyer segment, which could be a reason for hesitation in the market in general, right? Now, the market's come back, but still people can remember this. It's very recent, and they can say, I want to really make sure we're beyond that before I make a move, right? Or maybe people that were going to buy houses got scared and sold a lot of their stock after it had declined. And now the market came back, but they lost that value, and that's a value they could have used to buy that home. This is something that's very relevant that we want to keep an eye on when it comes to selling higher end homes. Okay. Now I want to show you too where the selling is happening in Jacksonville. So these are broken down by zip code, and you can see here the top 15 zip codes for sales in Jacksonville. A lot of it is happening in St. John's because a lot of it is tied to the new construction world. A lot of people are choosing to buy new construction homes because of the incentives on interest rates, closing costs, getting a brand new home. In many cases, if you go to David Weekley, who is a builder in your area, they are offering free pools with their homes. So there's a lot of competition from new construction, especially in St. John's. But you can see here, 32081, there were 68 sales last month. The average price was about $852, so that is about half of what you're selling your home for, a little over half. The average days on market is 128, so things are sitting a little bit longer there. And the average incentive when it was listed in the MLS per sale was about $18,000. Okay, and this $18,000 just shows you the impact of new construction, because that's all, the new construction closing cost incentives are about double what existing homes are doing. And I do this to give you context to what's going on in Jacksonville, especially what's going on in your zip code. Now, if we look at the price history by year, we can see that a great amount of appreciation happened when all of the money was printed and all the demand happened and interest rates were super low back in 21 and 22, going into 23. But since you bought the home in 24, prices have gone backwards in this zip code. And this is something that you might not be aware of, or you might not have factored in when you list your home. But this is something that's happening where there's more new construction competition. There's a lot of undercutting going on. People are trying to get their home sold, and they're finding that they're having to get more aggressive on prices to do so. Okay. Now, this is happening too because we see this green line is the number of active listings on the market by month. And you can see we had, 200 homes on the market. Interest rates fell, demand went through the roof, and we nearly sold out of properties in 32081. Since interest rates increased, we've seen the number of properties on the market increase, and we're seeing sellers sit on the market longer, and it's building up. The demand is still happening in somewhat, but it is at a lower level than it was prior to all the kind of craziness that happened during the pandemic. And so you're just dealing with a whole lot more competition than you were back in 24 even. And that is something that's causing a lot of hesitation from buyers. When we look at the days on market, again, this is averaged out by year, but you can just see the general trend is it's taking a lot longer to sell homes, right? Last month was especially long compared to this. But when we look at this, it's meant to just highlight the slowdown in this zip code based on what the numbers are telling us. And then if we also look at percent of original list price received, sellers were getting basically anything they listed the home for back in 21 and 22, pretty close to that in 23, but we've seen a decline. And this is, we got to remember, this is for homes that have actually sold. So it doesn't factor in homes that are sitting on the market that haven't sold just yet, but it shows a softening in the market overall. Okay. Now, when we look at showings, this is one of the ways we can kind of see where the market demand is. So I'm looking at showings in 32081 for single family homes from April to June in 24 to April to June in 25. So it's the same time year over year, and it is broken down by price point. And you can see how the market's really slowed down on the high end, right? We were seeing significant demand from the 1.6 to 1.9 range last year, and that has almost all but disappeared. Where you guys are right now is the 1.5 to 1.6 range, which is a better range than it was in 1.6. But in general, it looks like there is more activity once you get underneath that. And so I sort of look at this and think, okay, there's probably more people that are going to be interested in this home if you get your price in that 1.3 to 1.5 range. Once you're over 1.5, the demand slows down a little bit. And once you're over 1.6, it really slows down. Okay. Now, the other thing that's going on is I think that 32082 Ponte Vedra Beach is really attracting a lot of the buyers that might potentially buy in 32081. Because when we look at the same price points, there is a tremendous amount of showings compared to 32081. And this is really, really important because people are going over to the neighboring zip code and getting homes that are similar prices, but they're just in closer to the beach zip code. Now, I understand you guys bought a house on Roscoe. You guys are part of this. You bought a house in 32082 and you're selling a house in 32081. And this is just, a challenging situation because the demand is just not that strong in 32081 compared to 32082. And you're almost evidence of that given the move that you made to go to sell this house and to buy in Roscoe. Okay. Now, if we look at seasonal factors, I want to bring this up because it matters in terms of projecting out into the future of what you might expect to see in this real estate market. Real estate markets, you can't predict interest rates with any accuracy, but you can predict real estate markets using seasonal trends because we see very consistent seasonal patterns. It doesn't tell us the exact amount things will change, but it gives us an idea of the direction. And so when we look at this, I want to highlight I've taken 20 years of history in the Northeast Florida market, and I've gathered that and plotted out here the trend of how active listings go. So typically we see active listings rise modestly in the spring into the summer, sort of peak out towards the end of summer and start to decline as people take their homes off the market towards the holidays. The orange line is what's happening this year. And you can see that we just have an above average increase in the amount of inventory in Jacksonville. And this is something that is creating a whole lot of price pressure. It's not so much dropping prices significantly. This is nothing like 2008, none of that. But it is taking us to put us in a market where price appreciation just isn't happening in some areas. You're seeing prices go backwards like we're seeing here, and a lot of that is due to the amount of homes that are on the market. And it's showing up here in the seasonal patterns for prices. So we can't really compare historical prices to today. So what I've done is index them over time and made January equal to 100 and just watch how they change over time. Traditionally, we see prices rise through the spring, peak in June, and start to decline in the fall. Okay. Now, this year, it has been far weaker. We have seen prices very modestly increase, nothing like what we normally see. And that's because of that inventory buildup. But this is why you're potentially feeling some challenges on getting offers or getting traction in this market. It's just there's not a lot of price growth happening, and the home is priced for price growth to have happened. Now, I also want to bring this up. We are in June. Typically, that's the peak. Prices are going to typically decline in the fall, barring some sort of interest rate change that would stimulate a lot of demand. And so you could be looking at an even more price pressure type of market in the coming months, which could suggest that you might find yourself, even if you reduce the price more, you might find yourself overpriced again and again because the markets are declining in general. Okay. Now I want to shift over to listing competition for you. I've pulled the comparables in 20 Mile using those neighborhoods we talked about at the beginning. And this is looking at homes that are 28 to 3,400 square feet. Any appraiser would tell you they typically try to find a comp that's a little bit smaller, a little bit cheaper, a comp that's a little bit more expensive, and then something that fits right on. And so I've highlighted here your home in purple. These are the active properties on the market. And I've called out this 452 Quail Vista Drive. I think that this is a really good comparable to look at. Now, if my memory serves me correctly, this home looks like it is pretty similar to yours, minus a pool and a summer kitchen. So you could say that that is a value bump for you. But when you look at this, it's about the same square footage. It's set up in the same bed, bath count. Lot looks pretty similar. It's a little bit newer though, so it hasn't been lived in as much, but it is listed currently for 1.3. Okay, and you're at 1.5. So just doing that math, it doesn't take that much money to buy a pool and a summer kitchen for that home. And so a buyer might look at that home and go, well, I'd rather buy that one and put the pool in than pay the premium to get this one that already has the pool. Something to think about, right? And it comes in, you guys are just at under $500 a square foot. This is almost $100 a square foot less. So that's a big deal. When we look at active under contract, I've highlighted 539 Park Forest Drive. This is a little bit bigger, 5'4", 3,300 square feet. So it's almost 200 square feet more. And when you look at this, its current price is $149. Now it's under contract. You're not going to know what it's actually going to sell for. Chances are good it's below that number. But this is coming in at about $450 a square foot if it were to sell for that. So that is 50 a foot less than what you're at, and it's a bigger home. Okay. And then lastly, here's what's closed recently in 2025. And I've highlighted here 3391 20 Mile Road. This is a similar setup, a little bit of a larger house, right? 1 year newer. And it sold for $425 a square foot. And this is a really, really pretty home. It's got a pool. And so these are listings that I would suggest you use as comparables. Now, I should say this, your motivation matters here a lot too. Some people, we're seeing that there are sellers that are testing the market and sellers that actually want to sell. If your goal is to just have the house on the market and you hope the right person comes on, and they buy the house sort of out of the blue and they just fall in love with it and they pay what you want for it, that's totally fine if you want to do that. If you're actually trying to sell the house, though, the numbers here would suggest that the house is overpriced. The numbers would suggest that the market is underneath where you are currently, and it's under it by a decent amount, okay? We can visualize this by plotting out where the active and closed homes are. So what I've done here is just a scatter plot. Square foot is on the left and price is on the bottom, right? It's either the current list price or what it closed at. And if you're above this line, basically you're getting a bigger house for less. It's a less expensive sort of setup for the active listing or the closed sales. If you're below the line, it means you're paying more for less square feet. Okay, this is where your house sits, and it is sort of on an island out here. It is visibly expensive compared to the rest of the homes. You would want to be more towards this line at your price point, which would mean your home would need to be more like 3,400 square feet instead of 3,200 square feet to get you sort of on the line of where it makes sense. I call out this closed sale over here because it is a similar sized home, but it sold for 1.3. which tells you a little bit of where maybe the final resting point for the closed sale might end up being given the market conditions, right? Market conditions can always change, but that is how I use these charts to visually sort of see where the home might need to be. So you want to get as close as you can to that line, and you can't change your square foot. So really the only way to do that is to change the price. Now, one other way to look at this is days on market and price per square foot. And this is highlighting that essentially most all of the sales, when we look at these green dots, happen under 60 days on market. Now, the good news is you are under 60 days on market, but you are way out here on the price per square foot. We haven't seen any sales over $450 a foot, which tells you that it is going to be difficult to be the first unless you have some incredibly significant, lot, position, totally unique features of the house, something like that, right? Now, it doesn't mean that you can't sell over 60 days. There certainly are some sales there, right? We see sometimes where these houses sat for almost, 280 days, but in general, they were still priced a lot less than where your home is. Okay, so wrapping up with final takeaways, here's what I come away with when I look at the numbers independently from my point of view. First and foremost, the property appears to be currently listed above the market, right? Active and sold comparables are below the price range of the subject property, which tells me that the market is underneath you. Doesn't mean that a unicorn buyer can't necessarily come along, but I would say that the odds are against it. There's been an influx in listings and a slowdown in demand since 22, given rates have risen. There's more houses on the market, and new construction plays a big role in that. And so you're feeling that right now, which is why you're not necessarily able to get the highest of the prices that you might want currently. The homes that are selling are usually on the market for less than 60 days, and that is because they're going to market with the right price, which is really, really key. And I know that you guys were concerned about appearing desperate, and that's the hard part. When you go to the market with the wrong price, you have to do price reductions to get to the right price, and that can appear desperate, but it is far better to do that and to do that faster than to do that and let your house sit if you're truly trying to sell it quickly, right? Again, if your motivation is not strong and you want to just let it be and see if the right buyer comes along or the market comes to you, then by all means, it's all just about expectations at that point. 32082 is experiencing more buyer demand than 32081, and I think that this is really impacting the buyer pool for your home. They're finding properties in the neighboring zip code that is closer to the beach, is a little more prestigious because it's Ponte Vedra Beach, and they're viewing homes over there instead of your zip code. And so from my point of view, I would say my recommendation is at a minimum to get to 1499 to start to get closer to the market. Now, I still think that is over the market, especially knowing that we're entering a seasonal slowdown of fall soon. In St. John's, especially in this part of the world in Nocatee, school being out drives a whole lot of the business because people buy homes and sell homes while their kids are out of school, and then it really slows down when school starts back up. So I do think you will experience a more difficult market as we get towards July and August because the people that are going to buy homes in the summer are already under contract and already in process of doing that. So if you have any questions at all, direct them to Diane. She can get back to me with any of those. But I hope that this report has given you more insight into the market, into where your home is positioned, and I wish you the best of luck. Thanks.